Quito, Ecuador. Really happy to be here, really excited to see you, and I'm very thankful that you are here joining us and ready to start talking about writing goals. So let me share my screen and we can get started. So today we're going to be talking about writing goals and how to become skillful writers. And this is our agenda for today. We're going to start with a short reflection. We're going to talk about goals and different types of goals, the research behind goal setting, and some strategies to help our students to set and reach their goals. So let's have a few moments to reflect. And I want to ask you a few questions. You can answer through the chat, or you can answer if you're watching us on YouTube. You can answer through the chat on YouTube, and I'll try to see your answers. But this is a personal reflection, so the important part here is for you to really think about it and to have an inner conversation. So here's my first question. Do you regularly set goals for yourself? Is that something you do usually? And as I said before, you can answer through the chat or you can answer through YouTube, whichever way you prefer. So let's see if we have some answers. Do you ever set goals for yourself? Our second question, and what I want you to think about is, what steps do you take to reach your goals? When you set a goal, do you also create steps? Do you create a process? How does it work? And Miguel Paz says that he sets goals for himself. Okay, our next question is, and this one is an interesting one. Which goals have you achieved that were the most meaningful and why? So of all the goals that you have attained, can you think of one that was really meaningful? Let's see if we get some answers on YouTube. Susana Ceron says that yes, they are very important when you're teaching. If not, the lesson doesn't work. Totally agree with Susana. And Jose Luis Sarmiento says that he sets goals for himself and everyone around him. I would love to know how that works. So going with that idea, here's the next question. Do you set goals for your students? And if you do, what kind of goals you set for your students? Do you set performance goals? Do you set outcome goals? What kind of goals do you set for your students? The next question, and this one is key for our topic today, is do you help your students set goals for themselves? Sometimes as teachers, we tend to create the goals for our class, but do you give your students the chance to create, to set, to come up with their own goals? Is that something you do? And if you do, how do you do that process? And finally, our last reflection question for today is, do you know what goals students have set for themselves? Do you ever have that conversation with your students? Find out if they have personal goals, if they have academic goals, if they have professional goals. Do you have those conversations? So this is the way to start for our session today, because goals are an intrinsic part of being human. Goals are an intrinsic part of being teachers, and goals are an intrinsic part of being students. So how do we define goals? We use the word a lot. Do you actually have a definition for the word? If you have to give a definition, what would you say? And I want to show you a definition from the Macmillan Dictionary. And it's something that you hope to achieve. And here the key word is hope. The problem with hope is that hoping might not be enough. Sometimes just hoping to achieve a goal is not going to be all that we need. We need to create more than a vague hope. So let's look at the research behind goal setting. And I'm a great believer in research and looking at why things work the way they do. And I want to start by showing you these two professors, Professor Eric Latham and Professor Locke, and they are the fathers of goal research. They began their research way back in the 1960s, and they continue doing research on goal setting even today. And they say that goals, given the person has the requisite ability, motivate action. So keeping that in mind, let's look at the types of goals. There are three different kinds of goals. We have process goals, performance goals, and outcome goals. And here's the thing. Usually, when we think about goals, we tend to zero in on outcome goals. Most of the goals we set for ourselves are outcome goals. So what are outcome goals? Outcome goals are the final result that our students or we want to achieve. So this is what we say when we say, I want to lose weight, I want to learn English, I want to get a new job. This is the final step. This is the final outcome. And outcome goals are great, but the thing is that we need more than just outcome goals. We also need process goals and we need performance goals. So what are process goals? Process goals are the steps that are necessary to reach an outcome goal. So if we consider learning English, what would be the steps that we need to take to learn English? If we consider becoming a skillful writer, what are the steps we need to become a skillful writer? And performance goals are the standards we set for ourselves. So if we want to reach a really good level of English and we consider the steps that are necessary, how are we going to do that? How many hours a day are we going to invest? How many hours a day are we going to practice? Are we going to take an hour a week, an hour a day? Are we going to read books in English? If we are going to read books in English, how many books are we going to read? If we're going to improve our listening skills, how are we going to do that? What is the standard that we are going to apply to ourselves? So when we help our students create their own goals, we have to help them to consider the three different kinds of goals. If we look at the research by Locke and Latham, we are going to see that they did lots of things, but they narrowed down the information talking about goals in terms of content and intensity. And when we look at content and intensity, we have to consider different aspects. When we talk about content, we have to consider how specific is our goal. It's very different to say, I want to become a good writer than to say, I want to write better work emails. It's different to say, I want to become a writer than to say, I want to write my own blog. So goals need to be very specific to be effective. Another thing that we have to look at is intensity. And intensity has to do with our level of commitment and our level of motivation. Obviously, the higher our commitment, the higher our motivation, the more chances there are that we are actually going to reach our goal. And the last one that I want to tell you about, which is a little bit counterintuitive, is difficulty, because it turns out that easy goals are not more achievable than difficult goals. According to the research, when the goal is vague and it's not challenging enough, people tend to quit more than when the goal is very specific and it's challenging. So, how do we make this work for our students? Our students need very specific goals that they are motivated about and that are challenging. A very easy goal is not going to be motivating the same way that a very difficult goal it's also not going to be motivating. We need a goal that is challenging enough to be difficult but not impossible. So, if we consider this, we also have to consider the Harvard University study on writing goals. And this is a very interesting study. Did you know that there is a study that they did at Harvard University that said that students who wrote their goals were more likely to keep on going and actually reach their goals than students who didn't? Did you ever hear about that study? Are you familiar with that study? Did you ever hear about it? Can you answer in the chat box? You can do it here or you can do it on YouTube.
Maybe.
Somebody says maybe, but let's use the chat box. Anybody hear about the study? Well, here's the interesting thing. The study doesn't exist. There is no Harvard University study on writing goals. Nobody ever did a Harvard University study on writing goals. But there is a Dominican University study on writing goals. Because it turns out that Dr. Gail Matthews heard about the Harvard University study on writing goals, and she was very interested about it, and she decided to not only do the research to see if the Harvard University study existed, which it doesn't, it's a total urban legend, but also was interested enough to do the study. So there is a Dominican University study on writing goals, and this is what she did. She had 5 different groups of students. A group of students thought about their goals, but they didn't write them down. A second group of students wrote down their goals. A third group of students wrote down their goals, but also wrote actions to take to accomplish their goals. The next group of students wrote down their goals, wrote down an action plan, and told their friends about it and said that that was what they were going to do, and they made it public. And finally, the last group of students did everything. They wrote the goal, they wrote an action plan, they created a commitment with a friend, and they sent progress reports to their friends. So after all the students did this process, Dr. Matthews looked at the results and she found out very interesting things. First, writing goals is more effective than not writing goals. People who write their goals actually tend to accomplish their goals at a higher percentage than students who or people who don't write their goals. But also, more effective than writing goals is writing goals, creating an action plan, talking to friends, and having progress reports. So if we have students who have goals and they have plans, they want to become teachers, they want to become writers, they want to take a certification test, it's not enough to think about those goals. It's also a good idea to take all these steps, to write them down, to create an action plan, to share them with a friend, and to have progress reports with a friend. And finally, this is a topic that I really like. I really like to find out how our brain works, how the things that we do affect our brain, and how our brain affects the things we do. So let's look at the neuroscience of goal setting. There is lots of research, but here are some ideas that might be interesting. When we look at the way our brain functions when we think about goals, we can talk about two things, about the will and the way. The way has to do with cognition, about our executive functions. And it turns out that executive functions is limited and it's hard. Paying attention is hard. Concentrating on a specific task is hard, is demanding, and it is tiring. But it is also limited. We don't have infinite amounts of executive function abilities. When we're paying attention to one thing, we are ignoring others. So it's very important to know that the things that we are interested in, that we think are worthwhile, feel easier than the things that we are not interested in and we don't think are worthwhile. So it's important to choose goals that are tied to our priorities, because the things that are not important to us are going to feel impossible to do and they are going to make us quit. So when you choose a goal, it should be very carefully aligned with something that is important to us. So if we want our students to consider their goals as a class, and also as individual students, we have to be careful that they are goals that our students do think are important, not just us as teachers, but also our students. The second thing we need to know is that, as I said, executive function is limited, so you can only do one thing at a time. So if you consider that, then you need to help your students see that when they are going to dedicate their executive function effort to an activity, they need to do it in a way that there are no distractions, there are no interruptions, and that they can apply all their executive function to that new task. So if your students want to become better writers and they want to, start writing essays, for example, they shouldn't have their phone on, they shouldn't have the computer on, unless they are typing the essay. They don't need to have the TV on. They need to take that time and use their executive function for that specific task. Then we have the will. The will is our desire, our motivation, and what we need to push ourselves to do. And the thing is that new behaviors need to be rewarded, because to learn is in a way to be rewarded for behaviors. So if your students want to change the way they do things and they want to establish new goals, they need to also establish a reward system. Obviously, the rewards could be extrinsic or they can be intrinsic. The satisfaction that you get from checking a box of, I did this, I accomplished this activity, check, that is intrinsic satisfaction. But also, if they need more explicit rewards, they could do something like, every time I complete one of the steps, I give myself a small present. But they need to reward their behaviors so the motivation becomes stronger. Also, it's very hard to make big behavior changes, so we need to consider small behavior changes. So when a student says, I want to become a better writer, that's a big one. How about taking smaller steps and say, I want to pay attention to my punctuation, or I want to make sure that my sentences are connected correctly and that I'm not writing a whole essay full of run-on sentences. So create smaller goals, reward those goals, and then move to the next one. And finally, and this is a key one, a behavior is considered more valuable when it's tied to our values and to our identity. So this has to do with helping our students choose their own goals or helping our classes to choose a class goal. Many times as teachers, we come into the classroom with our goals, our ideas. This is what I want my students to do. This is the goals I have for my students. If those goals don't match our students' values and their ideas and their sense of identity, that's going to be a mismatch. Our students won't feel motivated. They won't feel that they need to work towards those goals. So that's why it's so important that our goals and our students' goals align. So what do we need to do? Find ways to connect the goals to our students' sense of self. For example, does every student in your class want to be an academic writer? Do all of them want to write essays? Probably not. Probably some of them have other priorities because they are going to be business people, so they want to learn to write business emails. Or some of them are interested in becoming journalists, so they want to learn to write newspaper articles. So make sure that their identity is tied to the goals that you are creating for your class or the goals that you are helping your students create for themselves. So let's talk about strategies. We now know what science and research tells us about goals. Let's look at strategies. And I'm sure you have heard about SMART goals. Probably everybody in the planet has heard about SMART goals. So let's do a test. Do you know what SMART goals stands for? What is SMART? Can you write it in the chat box? Let's see if we get some answers. What are SMART goals? What does it stand for? You can write it in the chat if you are here in the Zoom meeting, or you can use the chat if you are on YouTube. And I'm going to wait patiently and see if anybody knows what SMART goals are. Let's see. So far, we have a no. Apparently, I found somebody who doesn't know what SMART goals are. That's okay. Let's see if somebody doesn't know what SMART goals are. Here we go. Specific, measurable. What about the A? Specific, measurable. Excellent, Jose Luis Sarmiento. Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Also, there are different definitions. Sometimes they say achievable, they say attainable. So depending on the resource you're checking, but yes, those are SMART goals, which are all very good. It's a very effective tool. It's a great idea to have SMART goals. But I'd like to invite you to consider using B hacks. And B hacks are big, hairy, audacious goals. If you consider the research I told you about Locke and Latham, they said that goals have to be challenging. A very easy goal, it's not motivating. People who have very easy goals don't make as much of an effort as people who have challenging goals. And people who have easy goals tend to reach their goals far less than people that have challenging goals. And people who have vague goals, like, do your best, make an effort, give it your best effort. They don't do a thing. So consider having big hacks. Big hacks are, as I said before, big, hairy, audacious goals. And this was a term that was coined by Jim Collins and Jerry Porras. They did research looking at businesses, looking at companies, and they found that companies that became truly, really successful had big hacks, and they had goals that tended to be long-term, with smaller steps on the way, but they had long-term goals. So help your students set big hacks. It's okay to have goals that are achievable, but let's push for goals that are audacious. So, for example, as a class, a big hack could be we're going to master process writing. This is a big, hairy, audacious goal. Something else we could do as a class. We are going to ace the certification exam. This could be PET, CAT, FC, CHI, depending on the level of your class. But as a class, we are going to make a huge effort. We're going to work really hard to ace the certification exam, which is completely different to say, let's get a passing grade. Getting a passing grade, not as challenging as acing the certification exam. What about we're going to publish a class magazine? Again, writing a little paragraph, creating a little essay is not as challenging as creating a class magazine. And then maybe we're going to write portfolios with a minimum of X number of essays. So obviously you have to tailor the big hack to your class. As we said before, the goal has to be challenging but not impossible. So you have to be able to have a real conversation with your students and see where you are at and what is a challenging yet realistic goal for your class. So for example, you're not going to say to your A2 levels, we are going to ace the CHI, because obviously that's not going to happen. But can we ace a certification test? And here's the question. What happens if you don't ace the certification test? Well, if that was a failure, you set a new goal, but you pushed yourself to reach a higher standard, and that is motivating. I had a problem here. Okay, another thing that you can do, our second strategy, is to set personally motivating goals. As we mentioned before, sometimes we as teachers have certain ideas of goals for our class. We have certain plans for what we want to accomplish, but we fail to consider the individuality of our students. So before setting big hacks, we have to get our students to know what motivates them, to know what is pushing them, to know what they want to reach. So one way to do this is to use a goal wheel. And this is adapted from the science of people. And a goal wheel is a tool to measure how you feel about different aspects of a specific topic. This could be personal. You could talk about how you feel about your friends, your family, your business, your economic situation, your professional situation, but you can also use it in an educational context, and you can use it to see what students feel like, what is their sensation about their academic accomplishments, about their academic level, etc. So for example, if we want to master the process writing, we can get our students to consider how they feel about their brainstorming abilities, how they feel about their planning abilities, how they feel about their drafting abilities, how do they feel about giving feedback, how they feel about revising, editing, and how they feel about publishing. And they can measure their feelings going from 1 to 5, 1 being I'm not very satisfied, 5 being I'm very satisfied. And considering their own personal will, they can see where they should create their goals. If I am completely satisfied with my giving feedback abilities, maybe that's not where I need to work. Maybe I feel that I need to create goals for my publishing abilities. And this could be as a class or this could be individual. If we're working with lower level students, we can also create goal wheels. For example, if we are working with lower level students who are beginning to write paragraphs, we can consider different aspects like spelling, punctuation, cohesive devices, using complex sentences, using reference. So we can help our students analyze where their satisfaction levels are and where they need to work harder to feel satisfied. And from there, then they can set up their own goals, or we can set up class goals. So remember how we talked about different kinds of goals? We talked about having process goals, we talked about having performance goals, and we talked about outcome goals. And the reason many of our goals are a failure, why we don't reach our goals, is because we tend to focus on outcome goals. And the reason why most of the New Year resolutions fail very early on in the year is because we tend to think in terms of outcomes. We tend to think about what is it that we want to be the end goal, and we don't consider the necessary steps in the way, and we don't consider the performance goals that we need to set so we can reach our outcome goals. So this is something that we also have to consider when we set goals for our students. So if our outcome goal is we're going to master process writing, I want to ask you, what do you think could be some of the process goals? What do you think? If our outcome goal is to master process writing, and this is a BHAG, what do you think would be process goals to reach this outcome goal? Can you just write it in the chat box? Do you have any ideas? What could be some process goals to achieve the outcome goal of being a master in process writing? If you are on YouTube, you can do it in the chat on YouTube. If you are here in the Zoom, you can do it also in the chat box. Let's see if we have any ideas. So what do you think? Any ideas about what could be some process goals to become a master at process writing? Get students engagement, says Belkis Medina. Excellent, very good. you can get students' engagement. But how would you do that? Reading as much literature as possible. Very good, Alma. That's a very good idea. Reading. Maybe reading different kinds of literature, reading essays, reading poetry, reading all kinds of different kinds of text. What else? What do you think could be other process goals so we can reach the outcome goal of being a great master at prose and writing? Typing skills, says Jose Luis Sarmiento. Well, I hadn't thought of that one, but that's a good one as well. Very good. Dictionary use, improving vocabulary and having the ability to use different words. Relevant topics, excellent. Relevant topics. And Annie Cecilia, spell checking. Good. Okay, so here I have some ideas. So here are some goals that your class could set up as process goals in order to reach the outcome goals. For example, if we want to be good at brainstorming, we need to read about the subject before class. So a big hack for your class could be to come to class prepared, to have information about the topics. So when we have the brainstorming session, they actually have an opinion. Another process goal could be, we're going to research, I missed the two there, sorry. We're going to research vocabulary related to the topic. So if we know that we're going to be talking about a specific subject matter, it is a good idea to have a vocabulary list of words so you can participate, you can use the correct ways of expression. What about performance goals? Performance goals are standards. So if we're going to read about a subject, we need to consider how many different sources. Because if I say I'm going to read about the subject, but I don't have a clear idea, a specific number, maybe I actually won't do it. So we are going to read at least 3 different sources. If we're going to talk about science, a specific topic like plastic pollution, I'm going to read at least 3 different articles. If we are going to talk about politics, I'm going to read at least 3 different perspectives. If we're talking about vocabulary, I'm going to research vocabulary. I need to set a standard. So what is going to be the standard for my class? Well, I need to have a list for at least 10 words and collocations related to the topic. Maybe we can be more ambitious and say, well, no, not 10, let's do 20, let's do 30, but we need to set a standard that is both realistic and challenging. So this is our 3rd strategy for today. Consider using different kinds of goals. And then we have, going by the study, the Harvard study that was not really a Harvard study, we have to create a written document, create a commitment, and do reports. So how do we do that? First, you need to make it visible. If you have a class goal, it has to be visible. If you're working in a face-to-face environment, go ahead and post it somewhere in the classroom. If you're not working on a face-to-face environment, if you're working online and you're using Google Classroom, Edmodo, or some other sort of platform, it also should be visible. It should be there for every student to see. What are the class goals and what is your personal goal? So make it visible. Second, you can create progress journals or charts so students can track their progress. So everybody can give advice, they can give encouragement, they can cheer on each other. So again, if you're working on a physical classroom, there should be a place somewhere where everybody can see where everybody is, or you can do it online, or if your students are more private, they can do it privately in a progress journal and share with just one or two friends. An important thing is to have progress conferences, and these conferences could be teacher to student or they could be student to student, but it is important to talk about the progress, to talk about the setbacks, to talk about the challenges, to talk about the inhibitors, and to really think about what is helping you reach your goal and what is acting as an obstacle. So, for example, if our class goal was to master process writing, and some of our students want to improve brainstorming, what is helping them to improve their brainstorming? Well, maybe they say, I actually read a lot because now I'm using Instagram or Twitter, and there are lots of articles, so I get very interested. But also, maybe Instagram or Twitter are an obstacle because I get distracted by everything else. I start reading about this topic and then I start reading about, I don't know, the Kardashians or Taylor Swift. So it's important that students have the opportunity to talk about what is helping them move on and what is holding them back. And a key element here is to give feedback and be visible. You are the leader of your classroom, so be sure that you have the opportunity, to check in with your students, to see how they're doing, to cheer them on when they are doing great, to push them when they need a little push. So be visible. If you're working online, I think most of us are working online, it's important to know that a lot of online classes fail because the presence of the instructor is not felt. Students don't feel that they belong to a class and that there is a clear leadership role from the instructor. So if you're teaching online, if you're teaching a writing class online, make sure that your students know when to reach you, how to reach you, that there is a moment where maybe you write emails or you write messages or you post messages, so your presence is there, is felt, is strong. So finally, we need to evaluate. Why is it important to have an assessment of our goals? Because once we reach the goal, we need to set up a new one. It's not just, okay, I finished, I mastered brainstorming, I'm done. We need to see where we are going, how we are getting there, and if we are at the point when we can move on to a new goal. So make sure that goals are visible, that there is a clear progress chart, there is a progress report, that there is a clear commitment. Make sure that you have progress conferences where students have the opportunity to really think and analyze what's helping them, what's not helping them, what's useful, what is not useful. Make sure that as a teacher you are present and they know where and how to reach you, and make sure that there is a clear evaluation of the process. Okay. Finally, reword and set new BHAGs. And something very important to consider here when we're talking about writing is the whole idea of publish or perish. You are at a university, you are preparing teachers for the future, you're preparing professors for the future, and part of the problem with writing is that the idea of publish or perish doesn't trickle down to students. Lots of times what students write in class stays in class. The activities, they receive the correction, they see it, and it goes into a bag and it's forgotten. A big part of writing is that it can be deeply personal for you only, for your eyes only, as in a journal, but it also has a public component. If you're writing and there's not a reader, part of the process is missing. Writing in many ways is about having an audience, about having a public, about putting it out there. So if you have reached all of these goals, make sure that you create ways for your students' work to be visible. And this could be part of your BHAG. How can you create a medium for your students' writing to have an audience? If we are working with lower level students, that sense of accomplishment of this is what I wrote, look at it, it's very motivating. And I want to tell you my experience as a language learner. When I was learning English in the United States, part of the English program had a magazine, an actual physical magazine, because this was like 25 years ago. So way before the internet. So they had an actual physical magazine that they published, and it was from the work of all the students in the institute. They chose the best for for different levels, and they published this magazine once every semester. So it was a big deal. Here you had students from many different parts of the world learning English, writing in class, and a big part of it was knowing that maybe what you wrote would be published in the school's magazine. And I don't remember what I wrote, but I wrote something that got chosen. And I got the little magazine, and when I opened the magazine, there I was. My name, my country, my age. I was 16 or 17 at the time. And it was so exciting and so motivating that I actually sent the thing to my mom back in Venezuela. And this is when we had only snail mail. So that thing took forever to get there. But it was an important accomplishment, and it made me feel that I had reached a goal. So if possible, create ways for your students to have an audience and to have the opportunity to show their work to the world. So we have some time for questions. So I would love to see if you have any questions, maybe through the chat box or the Zoom chat box or the YouTube chat box. And I'm going to check and see if we have any questions here. What is the best model to plan? Says Susana Melissa. I'm not sure I understand your question, but I think it's a matter of talking to your students. I would consider, as I said, the different steps. Let's see if we can go back to that. You can consider different goals. You can consider having process goal, performance goal, outcome goals. You can also consider having your students write their goals, set an action plan, make a commitment with a friend, and finally have conference to talk about progress. Let's see if we have any questions. Oh, apparently I did a great job. So apparently it's all good. Let's see here in the chat box. Room to grow, says Jose Luis Sarmiento, always. There's always lots of room to grow. And I think think it's very important to consider lower level students. Sometimes we set goals for higher level students and we neglect the goals for the lower level students. So if you have students who are just beginning their writing process, make sure that there are goals for them as well. For example, to write good topic sentences, to make sure that all the sentences are connected to the topic sentence. So make sure that you're not neglecting creating goals for lower students just because they are at the lower level. And no, this was a pleasure. It was very enjoyable. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here and to get to know you and to participate. Pat myself on the back. Here I go. Okay, so also I want to share with you my information. I don't know if you can see my screen. No, you can't. And I'm not sure how to do to share my screen. Let's see if I can try that again. No idea how to do that. Okay, what I wanted to share is share my information, because if you have any questions, if you have any follow-up questions, maybe later, we are more than happy to help you. There it is, my screen. Excellent. So this is my information. I'm based in Quito, but I'm more than happy to answer a WhatsApp message or an email message. So feel free if you have any questions about this presentation, or if there's something else that we can help you with. A pleasure to help. Thank you. Let's see if we have any questions here. No, I think I did great. And here we have a question from Susana Ceron. What about if you don't find an objective for an activity? Is it a failure? I wouldn't go as far as saying that it is a failure, but I would wonder if it is a good use of class time and if it is a good use of students' time. If an activity doesn't have a real objective or a real aim, what's the point? And classes should be fun, and classes should be engaging and entertaining, and activities should be something that students enjoy. But there's a difference between engagement and edutainment. And I'm not sure if you are familiar with the term edutainment. Edutainment is the idea of having classes that are more entertaining than educational. So if your activity doesn't have a real objective, maybe it's just entertainment and doesn't have an educational purpose. So maybe you need to consider ways to create activities that are entertaining and also have a learning purpose. So if you're going to play a game with your students, and I know it has nothing to do with writing, but if you're going to play a game with your students, it's great that it is entertaining and they're going to like it, but what are they going to learn from it? If they're not learning anything because there's not a clear objective, maybe you need to tweak the activity a little bit. It's not that, just throw it out, but tweak the activity a little bit so there is an objective to the activity. Okay, so teaching English how to learn to write to adults is a challenge. It is, but it is also in many ways easier because students already have writing abilities in their L1, and the abilities to write are transferable. That means that what they know how to do in one language, they can use in other languages. So many times we think our students don't write or don't have writing abilities because they are not doing the academic writing that we might want them to do. But students are writing all the time. Students write WhatsApp messages, they write Instagram posts, they write Facebook posts. So they do have writing abilities. They make lists. But those are in their L1. It doesn't matter. They already have writing abilities. Now what we need to do is help them transfer those abilities from L1 to L2. So obviously adult classes sometimes are more challenging, but let's take those abilities they already have and incorporate them into our classes. If we have businessmen in our classes, they already know how to write business emails. So let's help them consider those things they do and translate them. Not translate them literally, but take them to the second language. So what are the salutations they use? What would be the corresponding ones in English? What are the conventions they use? What would be those conventions in English? So help them use those abilities they already have to become better writers in their second language. I think we don't have any other questions. So this was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And again, if you have any questions or we can help you in any way, please make sure to write to me. You have my phone number, you have my email address, and we would be more than happy to be of help.